Hello, family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with Surly Tales. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Accra's evening air carried a blend of diesel fumes and fried plantains, a reminder of the city's relentless energy. I had always loved the hum of life here, but that night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of orange and purple in the sky, the silence inside the house felt unnerving. Everyone was gone to my Auntie Abina's house for her birthday celebration, and for the first time in weeks, I had the house to myself, or so I thought. The living room was my sanctuary, cluttered with textbooks, a half-empty plate of jollof rice, and my laptop glowing faintly in the dim light. I was behind on an economics assignment, the kind that seemed designed to sap the soul. The cursor blinked mockingly on my screen, reminding me that I had yet to type anything substantial. The faint hum of the ceiling fan was interrupted by a knock at the front door. My brow furrowed. Everyone was supposed to be out until late. I hesitated for a moment before getting up to answer it. As I opened the door, there stood Amma, dressed in a simple yet stunning sundress that clung to her figure in all the right places. Amma was no stranger to our home. She was Na's best friend and a regular visitor. In fact, she practically lived here whenever my cousin was around. But tonight her presence felt different, out of place. "You're home?" I asked, my voice betraying my surprise. She smiled, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "I thought Na might have forgotten something. But it looks like I caught you instead." Without waiting for an invitation, she stepped inside, her sandals clicking against the tiled floor. "They're all at Auntie Abina's," I explained, closing the door behind her. "You know, the big birthday thing?" Amma nodded, glancing around the room as if she owned it. "And you didn't go?" Typical Kofi, always avoiding the crowd. I shrugged, feeling a mix of annoyance and amusement. "Someone has to keep the house standing." She laughed, a melodic sound that always seemed to carry an edge of teasing. "And by keeping the house standing, you mean burying yourself in schoolwork?" "It's called being responsible," I shot back, returning to my spot on the couch. Amma followed, sitting down across from me. She crossed her legs, her eyes fixed on me in a way that made my skin prickle. "Responsible is good, but boring. You should live a little, Kofi." I sighed, pretending to focus on my laptop. Amma had a way of stirring up trouble, her charm impossible to ignore. She was the kind of person who thrived on pushing boundaries, and I had always been cautious around her. The minutes ticked by as I tried to concentrate, but her presence was distracting. She leaned back on the couch, her gaze never leaving me. "So, what are you working on?" "An assignment," I muttered, keeping my eyes on the screen. "Let me guess. Something dull like supply and demand curves?" she teased. "Something like that," I replied, unwilling to give her more fuel for her playful banter. She shifted closer, the faint scent of her perfume filling the air. "You know, you could take a break. It's not healthy to work all the time." "I'll survive," I said, though my resolve was beginning to waver. Amma tilted her head, studying me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Kofi," she said softly, her tone dropping to a whisper. "Why are you always so serious?" I didn't have an answer. Her question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. Before I could find a response, she moved closer, her hand brushing against mine. The contact sent a jolt through me and I froze. "Amma, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled, a mix of confidence and vulnerability. "Relax, Kofi. It's just us here. No one will know." My heart pounded as I grappled with a whirlwind of emotions, confusion, fear, and a flicker of something I couldn't name. Her hand lingered on mine, her touch both comforting and unnerving. "This isn't a good idea," I managed to say, though my words felt weak and unconvincing. She leaned in, her face inches from mine. "Maybe it's exactly what you need." And in that moment I faltered. I let my guard down, giving in to a temptation I had tried so hard to avoid. It was a decision made in the heat of the moment, one that I would come to regret. When it was over, Amma stood, smoothing her dress as if nothing had happened. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "Don't overthink it, Kofi. It's our little secret." The sound of the front door closing behind her echoed in my ears as I sat there, staring at the empty space she had left behind. The room felt colder, the silence heavier. My chest tightened with a mix of shame and disbelief. I had made a mistake, one that would change everything. The days that followed felt like a haze, as though the world around me had lost its color. I tried to convince myself that nothing had happened, that it was a fleeting moment that I could tuck away and forget. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more the memory clung to me like an unwelcome shadow. Amma's behavior only deepened my confusion. She carried on as if nothing had happened, her demeanor unchanged. Whenever she visited Na, she laughed and joked like usual, her carefree nature masking the tension that burned within me. I avoided her as much as possible, but every encounter made my heart race with a mix of guilt and unease. 2 weeks after that fateful evening, I was sitting on the veranda, flipping through a textbook, though the words barely registered. The setting sun painted the sky in warm hues, but the weight in my chest refused to lift. The sound of footsteps broke my reverie, and I looked up to see Amma approaching. She wore a simple outfit, jeans and a t-shirt, but there was something different about her. Her usual confidence seemed muted, her steps hesitant. She stopped a few feet away, her hands fidgeting at her sides. "Kofi, can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to hear what she had to say. But her expression was unreadable, and curiosity got the better of me. "Sure," I said, closing the textbook and gesturing for her to sit. She remained standing, her gaze fixed on the ground. "I've been feeling different lately." "What do you mean?" I asked, though the knot in my stomach told me I already knew. She glanced at me, her eyes filled with a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. "I took a test," she said, her words faltering. "I'm pregnant." The air seemed to leave my lungs, and the world tilted slightly. I stared at her, my mind racing to process her words. "Pregnant." The word echoed in my head, heavy and unrelenting. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I took 2 tests. There's no doubt." My mouth went dry, and I struggled to find the right words. What are we going to do?" Amma let out a shaky breath. "I don't know. I haven't told anyone yet. I wanted to tell you first." Her words felt like a lifeline and a noose all at once. The weight of the situation pressed down on me, suffocating and inescapable. "We can't keep this a secret," I said, though my own voice betrayed my uncertainty. Amma shook her head. "No, not yet. My parents would kill me if they found out." "And your uncle?" "He'd throw you out of the house." She wasn't wrong. My uncle was a strict man who valued discipline and reputation above all else. The thought of his reaction sent a chill down my spine. "But we can't hide this forever," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know," she said, her voice barely audible. "But just give me time to figure things out. Please, Kofi." I nodded reluctantly, though every fiber of my being screamed that this was a terrible idea. As Amma turned to leave, I called after her. "Amma, I'm sorry." She paused, her back to me. "Don't be," she said softly. "It's not just your fault." The next few days were a blur of anxiety and dread. I threw myself into my studies, hoping to distract myself from the storm brewing on the horizon. But the guilt was relentless, gnawing at me with every passing moment. Amma stopped visiting as frequently, and when she did, she avoided me. It was as though we had entered a silent pact to pretend that nothing had changed, but the weight of the secret we shared grew heavier with each day. It wasn't long before the cracks began to show. Amma's parents were strict and watchful, and it was only a matter of time before they noticed something was off. The moment came one evening when Amma collapsed in her kitchen. Her mother found her unconscious and rushed her to the hospital, where the truth came out. The news spread like wildfire. In a close-knit community like ours, secrets never stayed buried for long. By the next morning, everyone knew Amma was pregnant, and I was the father. The confrontation came swiftly and brutally. My uncle called me into the living room, his face a mask of fury. Amma's parents were there too, their expressions a mix of anger and disappointment. Amma sat silently, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Kofi," my uncle began, his voice trembling with barely restrained rage. "Is it true?" I hesitated, the weight of their gazes bearing down on me. "Yes," I said finally, my voice barely audible. The room erupted into chaos. Amma's father shouted accusations, his words cutting deep. My uncle paced the room, his hands clenching and unclenching. Amma's mother wept quietly, her sobs filling the spaces between the yelling. "You've disgraced this family," my uncle spat, his eyes blazing. "I took you in, gave you a place to stay, and this is how you repay me?" "I'm sorry," I said, though I knew my apology would do little to repair the damage. "Sorry won't fix this," Amma's father said coldly. "What are you going to do about it?" I had no answer. The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken, as I realized the full extent of what I had done. The house no longer felt like a home. It had become a battleground of silence, tension, and resentment. My uncle could barely look at me without scowling, and Amma's parents refused to speak to me altogether. Nah, my cousin, tried to remain neutral, but even she couldn't hide her disappointment. The weight of judgment from everyone in the house, and the neighborhood, was suffocating. Word spread fast in our community. The gossip mongers latched onto the story, twisting it and amplifying it to scandalous proportions. Whenever I stepped out, whispers followed me like a shadow. The once familiar streets of Accra felt hostile, every glance a reminder of my failure. Amma's burden. Amma bore the brunt of it. The day after her pregnancy was discovered, her father declared that she would not return to school. He claimed it was to save her from the embarrassment, but everyone knew it was punishment. Amma's dreams of becoming a nurse, dreams she had shared with me on so many evenings, seemed to evaporate overnight. When I saw her next, her eyes were puffy from crying, and her usually vibrant energy was dimmed. We met in secret at a small corner of the backyard where no one could overhear us. "They're keeping me locked in the house like a prisoner," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't know how much more of this I can take." I felt a pang of guilt that went beyond words. "I'm sorry, Amma," I said. "I should have been stronger. This is all my fault." She shook her head, a sad smile tugging at her lips. "It's both of us, Kofi. We made a mistake, and now we have to deal with it." Her resilience amazed me. Despite everything, she refused to let the situation break her completely. But I could see the cracks forming in her resolve. "What's the plan now?" I asked. She hesitated, glancing at her hands. "My parents want us to go to the elders. They say it's the only way to fix this." The mention of the elders sent a chill through me. In our culture, elders held a revered position, their word often final. If Amma's parents wanted their intervention, it meant we were at the mercy of tradition and community judgment. The elders' judgment. A week later, the meeting with the elders was arranged. My mother traveled from our hometown to attend. When she arrived, she hugged me tightly, her face etched with worry. "Kofi, what have you done?" she asked softly, her voice filled with a mix of disappointment and love. The gathering took place in the family compound of Amma's parents. The elders, a group of respected men and women in the community, sat in a semicircle, their expressions solemn. My uncle, Amma's parents, my mother, and I stood before them like defendants in a trial. One of the elders, a man named Nana Ajamang, began the proceedings. His deep voice commanded attention. "We are here to address a matter of great importance. A child is on the way, but the circumstances surrounding it have brought shame to two families." I shifted uncomfortably, the weight of their gazes unbearable. They asked questions, probing for details about what had happened, how we had ended up in this situation. I told the truth, my voice trembling with every word. Amma's father spoke next, his voice cold and cutting. "This boy has destroyed my daughter's future. She had everything ahead of her, and now? Now she's a laughingstock." The elders deliberated for what felt like hours. When they finally spoke, their decision was clear. I would be responsible for the child's upkeep and for supporting Amma. The elders also demanded a traditional cleansing ritual to restore the honor of both families. My uncle was livid. And where is this boy supposed to find the money to support a child? He can barely take care of himself. I'll figure it out, I said quietly, though I had no idea how. The collapse of dreams. The days after the meeting were some of the darkest of my life. I tried to focus on my studies, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time I thought about the future, it felt like staring into a void. My dreams of graduating, getting a good job, and lifting my family out of poverty seemed further away than ever. Amma's situation was worse. Her health began to deteriorate. She was constantly tired, her once radiant complexion growing pale. When I asked her how she was doing, she brushed off my concerns. "I'm fine," she'd say, though it was clear she wasn't. Her parents' strictness only made things harder. They monitored her every move, and the stress of their constant scrutiny took its toll. One evening, I overheard my uncle and aunt arguing about me. "He's brought disgrace to this family," my uncle said. "If it weren't for my sister, I'd have thrown him out already." My aunt's voice was softer, but no less firm. "He's just a boy, Kwaku. Boys make mistakes. Don't forget, you weren't perfect at his age either." Their argument only deepened my shame. I felt like a burden, an unwelcome presence in a home that had once been a refuge. The breaking point. A month after the elders' meeting, tragedy struck. Amma collapsed again, this time while walking to a local market with her mother. She was rushed to the hospital, where the doctors discovered that she was suffering from severe complications with the pregnancy. I rushed to the hospital as soon as I heard, my heart pounding with fear. When I arrived, Amma's mother was in tears, and her father paced the hallway, his face a mask of worry. My uncle was there too, his stern expression softening when he saw me. The doctor emerged, his face grim. "We've done everything we can," he said. "But the baby didn't survive." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank into a chair, my head in my hands. Amma's sobs echoed down the hallway, a haunting reminder of the life we had lost. But the tragedy didn't end there. Amma's health continued to decline, and the stress of the situation seemed to drain the life from her. Her parents blamed me, their anger and grief spilling over into every interaction. I felt completely powerless. For the first time in my life, I realized the full weight of my actions, not just for me, but for everyone around me. I had made a mistake that could never be undone, and the consequences were more than I could bear. The days after the miscarriage were cloaked in silence, a grief so heavy it weighed on everyone in both families. Amma was discharged from the hospital, but she was a shadow of her former self. Her vibrant laughter, her fiery confidence, they were gone, replaced by a quiet, haunting sadness. It was as though a part of her had died along with the baby. I wanted to visit her, to say something, anything, that might bring her comfort, but her parents made it clear that I was no longer welcome in their home. "You've done enough damage," her father had told me the day she came home from the hospital. His words rang in my ears every time I tried to summon the courage to reach out. A community's judgment. If the whispers in the neighborhood were loud before, they now turned into outright condemnation. Everywhere I went, I felt the weight of their judgment. The women at the market stared openly, their hushed conversations stopping when I walked by. Old men sitting under the neem tree shook their heads, muttering about youth these days and no respect for tradition. Even my lectures became unbearable. Some of my classmates who had heard the rumors avoided me, their eyes filled with pity or disdain. My professors, though professional, seemed colder, their encouragement and guidance replaced by indifference. One evening, I overheard my uncle talking on the phone. "We've become the laughingstock of the neighborhood. My sister's son, an educated boy, has brought shame upon us." Hearing his words was like a knife to my chest. I had been trying to keep up appearances, to act like I was still in control of my life. But the truth was, I was crumbling under the weight of my guilt. Amma's decline. Amma's health worsened in the weeks that followed. She spent most of her days confined to her room, refusing to eat or speak to anyone. Na, who tried to visit her whenever she could, shared updates with me. "She's not doing well, Kofi," Na said one afternoon as we sat on the front steps. "She doesn't even look like herself anymore." I felt a deep pang of guilt. I should do something. Maybe if I talked to her. "No," Na interrupted, shaking her head. Her parents won't allow it. They blame you for everything. The words stung, but I knew they were true. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to do something. Amma's silence, her suffering. It felt like a punishment I deserved, but it also felt wrong to leave her alone in her pain. A mother's intervention. My mother, who had stayed in Accra to support me, noticed my growing despair. One evening, as we sat on the veranda, she placed a hand on my shoulder. "Kofi, I know this is hard, but you can't let it consume you." "I don't know what to do, Ma," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I've ruined everything." She sighed, her eyes filled with a wisdom born from years of hardship. "Mistakes don't define you, my son. How you respond to them does. You can't change the past, but you can try to make amends." Her words stayed with me, and the next morning, I made a decision. I would go to Amma's family, no matter how unwelcome I was, and offer my apologies. I couldn't undo the pain I had caused, but I could try to take responsibility for it. The confrontation. When I arrived at Amma's house, her father was in the courtyard, fixing a broken chair. He looked up when he saw me, his expression hardening. "What are you doing here?" "I need to see Amma," I said, my voice steady despite the fear churning in my stomach. "Please, sir. I just want to apologize." "She doesn't want to see you," he snapped, standing to block my path. "You've done enough." "Please," I repeated, my voice trembling. "I know I've hurt her, hurt all of you. But I can't just walk away. I need to make this right." Amma's mother appeared in the doorway, her eyes red from crying. "Right? How do you make something like this right, Kofi? Can you bring back our grandchild? Can you give Amma back the life she's lost?" I had no answer. The truth was I couldn't. All I could offer was my remorse. "I know I can't undo what's happened," I said quietly. "But I want to take responsibility. I want to help in any way I can." There was a long silence. Finally, Amma's mother spoke. "She's not ready to see you. Maybe she never will be. But if you truly want to help, you'll respect her wishes?" I nodded, my heart sinking. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of Amma through the window. She was sitting on her bed, staring out at nothing. The sight of her broke me. The elders' guidance. In the days that followed, my mother suggested that we return to the elders for guidance. "They helped before," she said. "Maybe they can help again." Reluctantly, I agreed. The elders, though stern, were wise and fair. They listened as my mother explained the situation, nodding thoughtfully. When it was my turn to speak, I poured my heart out, admitting my guilt and my desire to make amends. Nana Ajamang, the eldest of them all, spoke after a long silence. "Young man," he said, his voice heavy with authority, "you have caused great pain, but you have also shown courage by coming here. The path to redemption is not easy, but it is necessary." The elders decided that I would take part in a traditional atonement ritual, a symbolic way of asking for forgiveness from both families and the spirits of our ancestors. They also advised me to contribute to Amma's medical care and to commit myself to a life of integrity moving forward. A fragile hope. The ritual, held a week later, was both humbling and cathartic. As I knelt before the elders, the weight of my guilt seemed to lift, if only slightly. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. I began saving money from odd jobs to contribute to Amma's care. It wasn't much, but it was a tangible way of showing my commitment. Slowly, the whispers in the community began to fade, replaced by a cautious respect for my efforts to make amends. Amma, however, remained distant. Not told me she was slowly improving, but she still refused to see me. I understood. I had hurt her deeply, and healing would take time. The weeks that followed the atonement ritual were a slow, painful journey. Forgiveness, I learned, wasn't something you earned overnight. It required consistent effort, humility, and a willingness to confront the consequences of your actions every single day. Amma was healing, but she still refused to see me. I respected her decision, though it left a hollow ache in my chest. In her absence, I poured myself into rebuilding my life, not just for my sake, but for hers, for my family, and for the child we had lost. Finding purpose. The first step toward redemption came unexpectedly. While walking through the neighborhood one evening, I stumbled upon a group of young boys gathered around a makeshift football field. They were arguing over a game, their voices loud and passionate. It reminded me of my own childhood, of simpler days before life became so complicated. I watched them for a while before stepping in to mediate. "Why don't you all take turns as captains?" I suggested. "That way, everyone gets a chance to lead." The boys looked at me skeptically at first, but they eventually agreed. As the game resumed, I realized something. I had a responsibility to help guide others, to prevent them from making the same mistakes I had made. Inspired, I approached a local community center the next day. It wasn't much, a small, dilapidated building with a dusty courtyard, but it was a hub for neighborhood children. I offered to volunteer as a mentor, helping young boys navigate the challenges of growing up in a world that often left them without guidance. At first, the boys were reluctant to trust me. Many of them had heard the gossip about me and Amma. But over time, as I shared my story with honesty and vulnerability, they began to see me not as a cautionary tale, but as someone who had learned from his mistakes. Amma's progress. Through Na, I learned that Amma was slowly regaining her strength. She had started attending counseling sessions, something her parents initially resisted but eventually supported. The sessions helped her process the trauma and loss she had endured. She talks about the future now, Na told me one evening. She wants to go back to school, maybe even pursue her dream of becoming a nurse. The news filled me with a bittersweet mix of joy and regret. I wanted so badly to be a part of her journey, to support her as she rebuilt her life. But I knew that my presence might hinder her healing more than help it. The second chance. One afternoon, as I was helping the boys at the community center, I looked up to see Amma standing at the gate. She was wearing a simple dress, her hair pulled back into a neat bun. She looked stronger than I remembered, her posture straight and her expression calm. For a moment, I thought I was imagining her. But then she stepped inside, her eyes meeting mine. "Hi, Kofi," she said, her voice steady. "Hi, Amma," I replied, unsure of what to say. The boys, sensing the tension, scattered to the far end of the field, leaving us alone. "I heard about what you're doing here," she said, gesturing to the boys. "It's good. They need someone like you." "Thanks," I said, my throat tightening. "How are you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Better. It's been hard, but I'm trying to move forward." "I'm glad," I said, meaning it. "You deserve to be happy, Amma." She smiled faintly, her eyes softening. "So do you, Kofi. But happiness takes work." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything that had passed between us hanging in the air. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you completely. But I wanted to say thank you, for taking responsibility, for trying to make things right." Her words were like a balm to my wounded soul. "I'll keep trying," I promised. "For as long as it takes." The path forward. Amma eventually went back to school, enrolling in a nursing program at a local college. Her parents, though still wary of me, began to soften as they saw my efforts to change. I continued mentoring at the community center, finding purpose in helping others avoid the pitfalls I had fallen into. Over time, Amma and I began to rebuild a tentative friendship. It wasn't the same as before, and perhaps it never would be. But there was mutual respect and understanding, a fragile foundation on which we could move forward separately but with shared lessons. Reflection. Years later, as I stood on the stage of a community event, addressing a group of young people, I thought about how far I had come. My journey hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. I shared my story openly, not to seek sympathy, but to inspire. "Life will test you," I told them. "You'll make mistakes. Some small, some life-altering. But it's what you do after those mistakes that defines you. Don't let your failures bury you. Let them teach you." As the audience applauded, I spotted Amma in the crowd, a small smile playing on her lips. She gave me a nod, a silent acknowledgement of the journey we had both endured. In the end, we had both found our paths, not perfect, not without scars, but filled with the resilience that comes from facing life's hardest lessons head-on. The end. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.